Shit. Alright, I tried to be as concise as possible for this video, but it ended up being a big chungus of a guide, so just feel free to skip through to whatever part you want to know. If you want to climb the rankings and do astronomical DPS, then I recommend sitting through the entire thing. I kind of speed through some certain parts, so just let me know if you have any questions below. Alright, so the first thing you want to do if you haven't done so already is copy and paste this console command into your chat. Press enter, /reload. So what this is going to do is increase your max camera distance, so you can zoom out and have more visibility. Alright, so if you're using an add-on for party frames like shadowed unit frames, then I recommend disabling it and just sticking with the default party frames. They basically show you everything you need, and most add-ons work really well with them. Okay, to set it up it's really easy. Just go escape, interface, raid profiles, tick use raid style party frames. I untick the border and tick display only dispellable debuffs. So basically that's only going to show, it's only going to pop up with a debuff if I'm able to dispel it with my Purify Disease or Master Spell. Click OK. You can click here, unlock, drag the position around wherever you want. I put it like around here. You can customize the height and width however you please. Press OK and you're done. Alright, for the first add-on you want to download big debuffs. You know, the name says it all. It basically just increases the size of the debuff on your screen. Without it, it shows up as like little boxes inside the party frames, so you get less visibility. You want to constantly be on the lookout for things you can dispel. So to set it up it's really easy. Just go / big debuffs, enable it. You can turn off the test mode if you want, or leave it on. You're going to go down to anchor, and I anchor it to the right. You can anchor it to the left if you want, or okay, don't do inner. Just go, so I just do right. You can copy all these settings if you want, and press OK. Alright, for the next add-on I recommend downloading Omni CD. It's very useful for tracking your party's big DPS CDs, so you can alternate your CDs better, so you're not overkilling packs and wasting your PI and Void Eruption. It's also very useful for tracking CC cooldowns, so you can call them out when you need to. And if you're running with a Holy Paladin and you want to track Ashen Hollow, you got to make sure that they have Omni CD as well, or it won't work. Alright, to set up Omni CD, just go /Omni CD, go down to Dungeons, you can click on Test so you can see it, go Position. I anchor it to the left because my big debuffs is on the right. You can go down to Spells and enable whatever spells you want to see, and click Close. I think the most important spell to keep track of is Combust, because if there's a small pack ahead of you and the Mage's Combust is off cooldown, they're most likely going to blow it up, and you don't want to be wasting your 2-minute cooldowns or your Void Eruption on that pack. And also you can use your Night Fae ability on the Mage to reduce the cooldown of their Combust when there's a pack ahead of you, but I'll talk about that later in the video. And lastly, just download SimC, Simulation Craft. We'll be using that for stat weights, and I'll discuss that more in the gear section. Alright, for my Weakauras, I have a bunch of useful ones which I'll be discussing in the M+ general tips section at the end of the video. As for this one here, I copied a profile off Wago.io and just customized it. To be honest, I don't really look at this too much. The only things I look at are the Mindbender duration and my Void Form duration, which is in the middle of this insanity bar. But I'll link this profile that I customized in the description below. For your Covenant, switch to Night Fae if you haven't already. It's currently the best for Raid and M+, and honestly, if you run any other Covenant for PvE, you're just having a fucking laugh. I'll start off with the Legendary, very easy. Shadowflame Prism is currently best in slot for Raid and Mythic+. You can slap this onto your helmet or glove. I personally put it on my gloves because my current helmet is best in slot, but you can get more stat value from putting it on your helmet. I think the only legendary that comes close at the moment is Bofa. For trinkets, you want to run both Soul Eating Ruby and the Sinful Gladiator PvP trinket. Both are super strong to run in both Raid and Mythic+. Ruby synergizes extremely well with your Void Form, and the PvP trinket has around 40% uptime on its passive, which is pretty disgusting. If you have 2 or more players in your party running Kabbalah Simnel, then you can run that instead of the PvP trinket, if you want like 0.7% more damage. So the general stat weights for Shadow Priest are Haste and Mastery being equally as important, followed by Crit, then Versatility. If you want to min-max to the fullest and get the most accurate stat weightings for your character, then you want to sim yourself every week or so, or whenever you get like a big upgrade, because your stat values will change depending on your gear. Alright, if you want to sim your character to get the accurate stat values, just do /simc, copy and paste this. Make sure you have all the right single target talents and gear. Okay, now just alt tab. Alright, now you want to go on raidbots.com, go to stat weights, paste in your SimC data, let it import your character's data in, leave it on patchwork 1 boss 5 minutes, leave all these on, and generate stat weights. Alright, so here are the results. As you can see, intellect is my most valuable stat, then mastery, then crit, haste, versatility. Usually haste is higher than crit, but I think it's because I have like 30% haste, it's starting to value crit a bit more. But this is where you want to be. You want to have all these that are on a similar level, besides int, of course. Int is always priority. You can download an add-on called pawn and import this pawn string, and it will basically tell you which piece of gear is better for you without you having to do the maths yourself. And that's all. Okay, enchants, gems, and consumables. I'm just going to speed through these. So on your chest you want Eternal Insight, sims the highest. Cloak you want Fortified Avoidance for the extra stamina and survivability, especially during Pridefalls. For wrist you want Eternal Intellect. Rings you want either Tenet of Haste or Mastery, depending on your stat weights. For your weapon you want Celestial Guidance for multi-target raid fights and Mythic Plus. Sinful Revelation for pure single targets in raids. It's like a 0.5% DPS increase in terms of single target compared to Celestial. For oils, you want to use Shadowcore Oil. You want to have this constantly on your weapon. And lastly, make sure to use Heavy Desolate Armor Kits on your chest as well. It gives you 32 stamina, which is like 1% more health, but it can be a lifesaver. Alright, for gems, super easy. Make sure you have one intellect gem in any piece of gear. Then you can use either haste or mastery gems for the rest, depending on your stat weights. If you want to have even more gems, then you can add sockets to your gear by getting max rep in the Maw and purchasing this item from Venari with Stygia. I don't think I've done a single Maw quest since the launch of expansion because I'm lazy. But if you want to min-max to the fullest, then I recommend going through the pain of grinding that reputation up. Alright, consumables. For your flask, you want to use Spectral Flask of Power. For foods, you want to use Feast of Gluttonous Hedonism, but if you're too broke like me, then you sacrifice the 2 intellect and copper surprisingly palatable feast instead. And if you're even more broke than me, then you either use haste or mastery food depending on your stat weights. For your combat pots, you want to use Potion of Spectral Intellect because it scales way better than Phantom Fire. You can also buy Potion of Prolonged Power and use these right before the keystone gets put in. It'll give you 40 int for 1 minute, and this plus Potion of Spectral Intellect for the first pull of the dungeon will make you do brazy damage. Make sure to always use Veiled Augment Runes. If you're too broke, use Battle Scarred Augment Runes instead. You'll lose like 12 intellect, but it's better than nothing, right? And lastly, make sure to be fully stocked on healing potions for your survivability. Okay, for your raid conduits and talents, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know every optimal build for each boss. What I do instead is go to Warcraft logs and suss out what builds the top 100 logs ran for each fight. So to do that, very easy, just go on warcraftlogs.com, click on this tab, select rankings for whatever fight you want to see, go to classes, choose Shadow Priest. So this is going to show you the top 100 passes for this fight, and it will list the talents, trinkets, conduits, and legendaries that they use. So in this case, for Mythic Artificer, you can see that 98% of Shadow Priest ran Shadowflame Prism legendary, and 2% ran Talbot. So obviously you're going to choose Shadowflame Prism. If you want to look at other fights, just go up here, choose whichever fight you want to see. I'll go Sludge Fist. And literally the exact same thing. You can see all talents, trinkets, conduits, legendaries they use. You can scroll down here, see specifically which players are playing what. This will clarify any questions you have regarding raid builds. Alright, now onto the interesting portion of the video, your raid opener. Alright, so your opener will basically stay the same for every single target fight if you're running Hungering Void for raid, which is basically 100% of the time. So what you want to do is pre-pull, cast Vampiric Touch into a Shadowed Pain, Fey Guardians, Mindbender, Shadowed Death, Mind Blast, Void Eruption, Pot PI Trinket at the same time, Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague, then just continue on with your regular rotation. For this opener, the reason you Shadowed Death and Mind Blast right after Mindbender is to get them on cooldown so you can have a longer duration of Mindbender when using the Shadowflame Prism legendary. When you cast Void Eruption, it instantly gives you 2 stacks of Mind Blast. Then you want to pot PI Ruby right after, so you get the full duration of these effects during your Void form. Then you want to instantly Void Bolt for the extra 10% damage when using Hungering Void, and also extend your Void form duration, into a Mind Blast to get off cooldown, then Devouring Plague so you don't overcap on Insanity. After this opener, you want to use Shadow of Death on cooldown, use Mind Blast before it hits 2 stacks, try to use Void Bolt on cooldown, and never overcap on Insanity, so make sure you're always using your Devouring Plague when you can, and also try to fit in as many Mind Flays as you can in between while everything else is on cooldown. If you want to be a lazy cunt like me, then just chuck all that into a cast sequence macro, then all you have to do is press one button. It'll look a little something like this.
Oh, yeah.
But in all seriousness, if you're going to be using this cast sequence macro, then I recommend pressing it at like a slower pace, because sometimes if you press it too fast, like in that video, it will overlap your skills and it will start bugging out, so just try to press it at a slower rate. Okay, onto the rotation. So the regular rotation is quite straightforward. You want to have as much uptime as possible on your mastery, meaning you want to have Vampiric Touch, Shadowed Pain, and Devouring Plague on your target as much as possible. Try to recast Vampiric Touch at 7 seconds and Shadowed Death at 5, as it will add the remaining duration of the dot to the new one, so you're not wasting any globals. But at the same time, you want to be casting Mind Flay as much as you can. The reason for this is because every tick of damage Mind Flay does, there is a chance to get a free Mind Blast and Void Bolt from Dark Thoughts and Dissonant Echoes. When you get a Dark Thoughts proc, make sure to Mind Blast during your Mind Flay unless you have to move. When you get a Dissonant Echoes proc, you can use Void Bolt on at least 38 Insanity, then cast a Devouring Plague right after to get the extra 10% damage on your Devouring Plague when running Hungering Void. Unlike other dots, when you refresh Devouring Plague, the damage gets carried over to the new one, but you still want to try to use Devouring Plague at around 1 to 2 seconds remaining, so you can have high uptime on your mastery, unless you're close to overcapping Insanity. In that case, you just cast another Devouring Plague. Alright, CD timings are very important if you want to maximize your DPS for Raid and Mythic Plus. You pretty much always want to sync Mindbender and Void Eruption, as Void Form gives you way more damage on your Shadow Flame Prism due to the extra Mind Blast and extra damage. Obviously, this depends on the fight. There might be situations where you need to hold onto your Void Eruption, but you can afford to use your Mindbender, as it will be up by the time you cast your Void Eruption. In that case, you can use Mindbender on cooldown. Another thing I want to talk about is the importance of syncing your Void Eruption with PI and Trinket when you need to. So typically you want to use your PI and Void Eruption on cooldown, but if you know the fight will end soon and you won't be able to fit in another Void Eruption or PI, then it's worth waiting for your big CDs to come off cooldown and use them at the same time. So I'll just show you guys an example of this. What you can do is go into Warcraft logs and check your casts. So for example, if I wanted to look up casts in this Huntsman fight, I just go here, click on casts, click on my character. I want to filter PI and Void Eruption only. Okay, so now it's only going to display these two skills. So as you can see, I use PI and VE on pull, then VE again at 1 minute and 25 seconds. My PI would have come up at around 2 minutes and 7 seconds, but instead of popping it on cooldown straight away, I held onto it because I knew that even if I popped it on cooldown, I wouldn't be able to use another one before the end of the fight. So I wait around 30 seconds for my Void Eruption to come back off cooldown, and I use my Power Infusion and Trinket and VE at the same time for more DPS. So you really want to apply the same concept for every boss fight to get maximum value out of your cooldowns. Alright, I'm going to start off with the Conduits for Mythic Plus. So these are quite flexible. Both Nia and Korain are viable soulbinds for dungeons. If you want to maximize your DPS, then I recommend running Korain Soulbind with Rabid Shadow's Conduit for these 6 dungeons. The reason why this slightly beats Nia for these dungeons, even in high level keys, is because you benefit from crit strike more than mastery in multi-target scenarios. That, coupled with the extra 10% damage when they're above 75% HP, is huge, as this build doesn't require much ramp time and you can pretty much instantly start dishing out big damage on pulls. However, you still want to run Nia for Spires and Theater due to their low mob count pulls, where you tend to get more value out of mastery. I personally replaced Dissonant Echoes Conduit with Rabid Shadows for every dungeon besides Theater, as you did not get much value out of Dissonant Echoes when you're running Ancient Madness instead of Hungering Void, especially in a dungeon where you're using Mind Seer as your main filler over Mind Flayer. As for your talents, Shadow Flame Prism has honestly made everything quite simple. You run these talents for every dungeon besides Theater. You can optionally replace Psychic Horror with Last Word for Spires, as you need as many kicks as you can get in that dungeon. For Theater, you want to be running these talents. There are a lot of very small pools in this dungeon, so you benefit more using Fortress of the Mind, Misery, and Hungering Void. I personally use Shadow Crash for Theater as it still manages to do a good amount of damage overall, and it's very useful for big pools in tight rooms and for the adds on the last boss. But it shouldn't hurt going Auspicious Spirits as well, especially when you start doing higher keys. Alright, for your rotation, I'll start off discussing your rotation when running Searing Nightmare, as you'll be using it in pretty much every dungeon besides Theater of Pain. I'll talk about Theater at the end of the section. So I think the easiest way to go about your rotation is to have set openers and rules for each mob count. So I'll start off with 1 target and go up to 7 and higher. So for 1 target, it is very similar to your raid rotation, except this time you'll be popping your pot, PI, Trinket before your Mindbender and using Shadow Crash right after Void Eruption. This is because you're not running Hungering Void and you will get the full effect of your Shadow Flame Prism and Ancient Madness within a shorter window. So you want to open up with Vampiric Touch, Shadowed Pain, Fey Guardians, Pot PI Trinket, Mindbender, Shadowed Death, Mind Blast, Void Eruption into Shadow Crash and 2 Mind Blasts. Then just continue on with your regular rotation, make sure to use Devouring Plague before overcapping on Insanity, and use Void Bolt and Shadowed Death on cooldown. Alright, 2 targets is very easy, it's the same as your 1 target rotation. This time you want to maintain Vampiric Touch and Shadowed Pain on your primary target. Secondary target only needs Vampiric Touch to proc Shadowy Apparitions. However, if it's the beginning of the pool or you're moving from a mechanic, then you might as well chuck a Shadowed Pain on your secondary target as well. Alright, 3 targets, this is where things get a little spicy. If you have Void Form, then you want to Vampiric Touch all 3. If you have the Insanity, then you Mind Sear into 1 Searing Nightmare, so your Shadowed Pain gets on all 3 targets. Then you want to Fey Guardians, Pot PI Trinket, Mindbender, Shadowed Death, Mind Blast, Void Eruption, Shadow Crash, Mind Blast, and then continue with your regular single target rotation. Since we're running Ancient Madness instead of Hungering Void, you can get away with spamming Searing Nightmare instead, but going single target would be more consistent and also make it easier for your team to get through the pack. Now when you're out of Void Form and there are 3 targets, all you have to do is Vampiric Touch all 3, Mind Blast on cooldown, and spam Searing Nightmare. The same applies if there are more than 3 targets as well and you don't have your Void Form up, but this time you can VT up to like 4 targets. Alright, so for 4 to 6 targets, you want to VT up to 4 targets while your tank is generating threat and grouping them together. Then you want to Mind Sear into 1 Searing Nightmare, Fey Guardians, Pot PI Trinket, Mindbender, Shadowed Death, Mind Blast, Void Eruption into a Shadow Crash and 2 Mind Blasts, then Mind Sear and spam Searing Nightmare. Pretty easy, right? Since your Shadow Flame Prism is capped at 6 targets, you will start to benefit more out of spamming Searing Nightmare when there's 7 or more targets. For 7 or more targets, it's super easy, you just Vampiric Touch up to 4 until they're grouped, then pop Fey Guardians, Pop PI Trinket, Mindbender, Void Eruption, Shadow Crash, Mind Sear and spam Searing Nightmare. Make sure to pop Fade in case your tank loses aggro, like in this situation here. Actually, he just straight up died here, but make sure to use Fade, it can be a lifesaver. So after your CDs run out, you can reapply your Vampiric Touch on up to 4 mobs if you think they're going to live the duration of the dot. Alright, so for Theater of Pain, since you'll be running Misery and Hungering Void, it will be slightly different but essentially the same thing. You want to use Vampiric Touch on up to 5 targets, then do a regular raid opener by adding in Shadow Crash if you're using it. So you want to Fey Guardians, Mindbender, Shadowed Death, Mind Blast, Void Eruption, Pot PI Trinket, Void Bolt, Shadow Crash, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague, then just use your Void Bolt on cooldown and not letting your Mind Blast hit 2 stacks while using Shadowed Death on cooldown. You can actually use your PI on pool so you can get your dots on the target faster, then just continue with the same rotation. Okay, I'm just going to run through some things that you might find useful when pushing keys. Firstly, don't click your spells, ever, okay? I know there's at least 1 spell clicker that's seeing this video. Keybind everything, please. I don't care if you have to press Ctrl, Alt, 6 to use the ability, just do it. I'm watching you. Get engineering as a profession if you're going to be taking keys seriously. It's super easy to level up. You get a battle res, a 12-second invis, and cardboard assassin. You can switch between invis and cardboard assassin mid-key if you have the materials. For macros, I recommend making a Shadow Crash Smartcast macro. It'll save you the time clicking after using the spell. Make a focus kick macro for your silence. To do that, keybind this mouse over macro, use it on the mob you want to silence. When the focus target casts a spell, use this focus kick macro and it will instantly silence the target without you having to target it. Lastly, you can also use this mouse over macro for Purify Disease. It'll just make it so you only need to hover your mouse over the party frame to use it, so you don't have to switch targets. If you're Night Fae, which you should be, you can use Fae Guardians to reduce the cooldown of your mage's combustion by 20 seconds, and even more if they use shifting power during the buff. This can be crucial for times when your mage's combustion isn't up, and there's a huge pack or a boss fight in the next pool. So if you're not in voice comms with the mage, then just keep an eye out for the combust cooldown on Omni CD. If you want to be an absolute sick cunt and top the overall charts, then you don't have to worry about this tip. You want to be using your Desperate Prayer, Fade, and Vampiric Embrace as liberally as possible throughout your dungeons, especially when you know there's incoming damage. I can't believe I have to say this, but make sure those skills are keybinded. Please. You want to try and save Vampiric Embrace for Pridefuls and pop it when Pride stacks reach around 13 to 15, depending on how much damage you have. You have a Fear and a Stun, you should be trying to use them as often as you can. You'd be surprised how many keys you can save by using them. Master Spell and Purify Disease are extremely useful as well. You want to be on the lookout for enemy magic buffs as well as party debuffs that you can Master Spell. As a DPS class without a Lust or a B-Res, you need to carry your weight by actually using your utility. You pretty much always want to be popping Mindbender and Void Eruption on cooldown while trying to sync every second Void Eruption with PI and Trinket, unless the pack you're fighting is going to die quick and there's a huge pack or a boss in the next pool. You want to pop your Fey Guardians when your Void Eruption has 40 or more seconds left of its cooldown, so you're not wasting the CD reduction, unless you're popping Void Eruption as soon as it comes off CD. Use your Leap of Faith to get your tank out of sticky situations. You can ask your tank to call for it if you're on voice comms, or if you see them getting clapped and trying to kite, then just chuck them a grip. Alright, Mind Soothe is probably the most broken spell that you have, and also the reason why Shadow Priests are only slightly off meta. It's essentially like a Rogue Shroud. You're able to skip packs that you otherwise would have had to Invis Pot and belt through. Just play around with it in dungeons and you'll discover different skips that you can do. Alright, I'm just going to list some useful Weakauras that I use. I'll link them all in the description below. So I got a Fortified and a Void Form one. It basically tells you when you're not in Void Form or if someone in your party does not have the Fortitude buff. I have a Consumable / Armor Kit Tracker. Lets you know when you're not using a consumable or like your Augment Runes or your Armor Kits in a dungeon. I use a Focus Interrupt Weakaura. Basically makes the focus target's cast bar customizable so you can see it clearer, and it plays a horn sound if everyone else in your party has kicks on cooldown besides you and the cast is going off. So it pretty much ensures that you don't miss your silence. Lastly, and probably the best tip I can give you if your goal is to climb the rankings, I've seen a lot of Shadow Priests at my level utilizing this strategy, is to run dungeons with top push groups or higher IO people and just sit back and enjoy your free IO injections. Alright, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'll try to help you out.